Welcome back again to our ongoing series on the glories of our beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Shatarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So today we are continuing with our series on Srila Jiva Goswami and his service to his beloved Govindadev. In our last lecture, we discussed in detail the arrangements that Srila Jiva Goswami made for the worship of Govindaji after his discovery and installation. And that also included the services of Kashishvara, that very intimate associate of Lord Chaitanya, as well as Srila Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, who, as you remember, had a disciple build a small temple for Govindaji in Vrindavan. And that temple served Govindaji well until later a magnificent temple was constructed for Govindaji, the remains of which actually still stand in Vrindavan today. And they're regarded as an architectural wonder. And I would like to share with you today just how that temple came about. But firstly, I think it's important to give some background of what was happening in India at that particular time. At that time in history, we're talking around the late 1500s, Akbar I was the Moghul emperor of much of the Indian subcontinent. Now he ascended the throne in 1556 when his father, Humayun, which we mentioned in a previous lecture, died in an accident. And Akbar ruled his empire actually from Agra, which many of you know is only a 45-minute drive from Sri Vrindavan Dham. I was thinking initially he would rule from, Delhi, but he ruled from Agra. Now, it's interesting that when he ascended the throne, he was only 14 years old at the time. But in those days, princes, not only in India, but Europe and other places, they were groomed from a young age in ruling, dividing and conquering, diplomacy, the art of war. And Akbar also had the advantage of the expertise and wisdom of one Raj Todar Mal Singh, who was the finance minister in the Moghul Empire at the time. Now it's interesting, Raj Todar Mal was a devotee of Krishna, and Akbar often gave him leave to go on pilgrimage, actually. I was reading, Todar Mal is also accredited with translating the Srimad Bhagavatam into the Persian language. And as an experienced statesman, he would be Akbar's advisor throughout Akbar's reign. Now, Akbar himself was unique amongst the many Mughal emperors who ruled India for quite some time. Historically, he's considered a liberal ruler, to begin with because he was a patron of arts and culture. I was reading he created a library of over 24,000 books written in Sanskrit, Urdu, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Arabic. And he's famous for establishing a library of extensive works exclusively for women. And he created many schools, both for Muslims and Hindus, throughout his vast empire. Now, scholars write that he was disillusioned with Orthodox Islam and hoping to bring about religious unity within his empire, Akbar created you could say, a spiritual movement of his own with the combined teachings of Islam, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism and Christianity. But he was also, a ruler. He's the emperor, the king of kings, you could say. He was also ambitious to extend his empire as far and wide as possible. And beyond just fighting battles to achieve that end, he entered into many alliances with both Muslim and Hindu rulers to achieve that goal. And as a result of these alliances, such rulers, Hindu and Muslim, they were employed in his vast army in order to conquer and subjugate rebellious kingdoms. Now, historically, one such ruler was Raj Man Singh. He was the Kachwaha Raj, or you could say the king of Amer, a state later known, or as we know it, as Jaipur in Rajasthan. He was Rajput. And Rajman Singh was a staunch devotee of Krishna. And he was a trusted general in Akbar's army because of these alliances they made, which served both parties favorably. So historians say that Akbar included Rajman Singh in his Navaratnas, or the 9 Nava gems Ratna of his royal court. And I read extensively actually, that Man Singh fought 67 major battles. He won 67 major battles for Akbar. So they were quite close actually. So one time, Akbar ordered Man Singh to quell a major rebellion that was taking place in Bengal, faraway Bengal. Now at that time, Man Singh was in Lahore, that city Lahore, which is modern-day Pakistan, but of course previously was India. So he got that order to go to Bengal and quell the rebellion, but he came to Mathura to take some of his army troops that he had stationed there for the fight in Bengal. Now, while he was in Mathura, it's really interesting. Some of his army lieutenants suggested he visit nearby Vrindavan to take blessings from a great saint, they said, whose name was Rupa Goswami, so they could win the fight in Bengal. So Man Singh, he went to Braj, but first he went to take darshan of Govindaji in that little temple. Because Govindaji by that time was, popular. I mentioned in previous lecture that devotees were coming from all over India to take darshan. So Man Singh, his first business was to take darshan of Govindaji because he was a Krishna Bhakta. Now as he stood before Govindaji, he was mesmerized by the Lord's beauty, his countenance, his ambience. And he made a famous vow before the Lord. And that vow was that if Govindaji blessed him to win the upcoming battles in Bengal, he would come back and build the Lord a most beautiful temple in Vrindavan. What history is this? Oh. So his court poet, who was with him at the time, actually recorded Man Singh's actual words and later wrote them in a manuscript called the Manapakashi Prabandha, the Manapakashi Prabandha, which I believe is in the Royal Library now in Jaipur. Now the poet didn't sign his name out of humility, but he heard the vow and he wrote it down, as they did in those days. And here is Man Singh's vow to Govindaji. Vrindavani Dvaita Vrindabhandye Govinda Rai Lalyam Ariren Aham Vidya She Bata Yena Bhuya Krishna Vatorat Sava Sam Brahmasyat. And I quote, in Vrindavan, which is praised by all the hosts of demigods, I will respectfully construct a dwelling abode for Shri Govinda Rai. as a result of which there will be immense facilitation of the festival of Krishna Janmashtami, unquote. What a vow. Now, much of what we're sharing today comes from the journals and the diaries and correspondence of such personalities like Man Singh, as well as Akbar's secretaries, scribes, and poets who also accompanied him everywhere and meticulously kept records of all that he did and all that he said. That's why we have so much detailed information, because of these scribes. Anyway, after taking darshan of Govindaji, Man Singh, this Rajput general, he went to see Rupa Goswami to receive his blessings for the upcoming campaign in Bengal. And I found a reference in the Vrindavan Research Institute, which I now have the opportunity to visit daily, that upon first seeing Rupa Goswami, Man Singh recognized that he was the same personality who was previously positioned as Dabir Kash in the court of Nawab Hussain Shah in Bengal. You know, having an important position in politics, Man Singh knew the various political personalities around India. I mean, he was well-traveled. And in this way, he recognized Rupa Goswami. And he was deeply impressed how he had become the saint that he was, the pure devotee of the Lord that he was. But I also read that while meeting with Sri Rupa Goswami, he didn't mention his private vow to Govindaji. Now, historical records show that Man Singh was indeed successful in crushing that rebellion in Bengal. And upon returning to Agra, 2 months later, he met with Emperor Akbar, and he shared with him the success of his battles. And he personally fought in those battles as well, and how his campaign in Bengal was successful. So during their talks, he mentioned how he had received Rupa Goswami's blessings. And he also revealed to Akbar his confidential vow to construct a temple for Govindadev in Braj. Now, being the pious person and liberal ruler that he was, Akbar was actually interested in facilitating or building of such a temple. And from the diplomatic point of view, he also thought it would expand his popularity and thus win the hearts of the Vaishnavas. Again, he was interested in religious unity in his empire. Very interesting person, interesting time in history of India. So within a couple of days, Akbar made a decree granting, from my research in the Institute, 135 bighas. Bigha means approximately 84 acres, or I believe it's 33 hectares, but by today's calculations, of property in Vrindavan, exclusively for Govindaji. Of course, Akbar, quote unquote, owned all this land. So he gave it for the deity, for Govindaji. And I saw in the decree that he declared that in the future, any taxes from that land should be used exclusively for the seva. The word there is seva, of Govindaji. Now that actual decree, that proclamation, it's in the Institute here. Now, with that, decree, Man Singh went back to Vrindavan, and he again met with Sri Rupa Goswami, and he revealed how he'd taken this vow to Govindaji and how he'd won the battles and the campaign in Bengal, and he came back and the emperor agreed that a temple should be built. But surprisingly, Rupa Goswami, who was growing a little older by that time, he was 53 years older than Akbar, he was deeply involved in his writings and discovering the holy places and doing his bhajan, And he was happy that, Govindaji had his little temple there. He said to Man Singh, "Sir, there's no need to construct a large temple. Shri Govindadev likes the nature of Vrindavan." Wow. Shri Govindadev likes the nature of Vrindavan. I wish the modern day politicians would take that to heart and keep Vrindavan as it was, hundreds or thousands of years ago. A beautiful rural place with temples scattered here and there. And anyway, it's another discussion. Also, it's said that Rupa Goswami didn't want, a big temple built because he didn't want to disturb or destroy in any way these beautiful forests of Vrindavan. But Man Singh, himself being a devotee of Krishna, and he'd taken this vow and he took it very seriously. If we take a vow, to Guru or Gauranga or Krishna, we take it seriously. So he'd taken a vow to Govindaji, and he was adamant, and he kept, insisting. So after some time, Rupa Goswami thought about it, and how many people would come and get the darshan of Govindaji, etc. So eventually, Rupa Goswami gave his consent. And I might add an interesting note here that in all the original documents issued in the court of Akbar, Govindaji is addressed as Govinda Rayaji. I saw that. He's addressed as Govinda Rayaji in those days. Raya, of course, refers to the king. But as we know, words and names, they often change in time through the centuries. So later people began referring to, Govinda Rayaji as Govinda Devji. And then down through time, now we know that deity as Govindaji. Here in Vrindavan, he's called Govindaji, and if you go down to Jaipur, where he's being worshipped, it's Govindaji. But it's interesting. So now after Rupa Goswami gave his consent, Rajman Singh was considering exactly where to build that temple. But eventually he settled on building it on the Yogapith, the actual hill where Rupa Goswami had discovered Govindaji. Now, there's a specific reason why he chose that spot. According to the Adi Varaha Purana and other scriptures as well, this Yogapita hill is in the shape of Kurma, the turtle. And in ancient times, that place was known as Kurma Tila. Even before the six Goswamis arrived in Vrindavan, it was known as Kurma Tila. According to many Brajabasis, it's the very place where Kurma Dev rested after participating in the churning of the ocean of milk. And I found in a scripture called the Bhakti Kavacha, it's mentioned that Bhakti Devi's asana in Vrindavan is that Kurmatila, or the Yogapith, where Govindaji was discovered. It'll make it much more relevant and important to you when you go to this see Govindaji temple and understand the history behind it, the long history behind it. Now this is all very interesting because Rajman Singh was from the family line of the Kurma Kula Kachava lineage, the lineage of Lord Vishnu who incarnated as a turtle. That's his line. Lineage goes back. So therefore he chose that place. So in due course of time, construction began. Now in preparation for this class, we went down to the Govindaji temple. And we, looked everywhere, scouted everything out, and talked to the pujaris, and several devotees were with me who had studied this carefully, the temple and its history. And we discovered on the left side of the temple, on a wall of Govindadev's temple, there's an inscription in stone that gives the names of all the main persons who actually participated in building Govindaji's temple. It's inscribed in stone. We photographed it, and I had it translated. And I wanted to read to you, because it's so interesting, like who participated, who did what. Of course, we've never heard of these personalities, but certainly they were special personalities that were, chosen by Man Singh, and Rupa Goswami gave his authorization, and they were in charge of building this architectural wonder. It's there in stone. So it reads as follows, quote, in Samvat 34, Vikram Samvat 1647 or AD 1590, in the reign of the king Sri Shaka Bandar Akbar, the great king Shriman Man Singh, son of King Sri Bhagavan Das of the lineage of Sri Prit Viraj of the Kurmakula Kachava family or lineage, made a temple on the Yogapith place of Yogamaya in Sri Vrindavan. Sri Kalyana Das was in charge of the work on Sri Govinda Dev's temple. Marak Chanda Chopala was the architect. Sri Govinda Das Dilavala was the builder. On Thursday, Guru Sombi Icha, may all be happy. Hare Krishna. Oh boy. So in a previous lecture, we stated that Sri Rupa Goswami designed the temple. But when I looked into the matter more, it's not that he actually gave the actual design, but rather he gave indications of how he would like it to be. Much like our Srila Prabhupada gave some ideas to be included in our Temple of Vedic Planetarium in Mayapur. He didn't actually, give every detail of the temple, but he wanted it to be like that. That would include a Vedic planetarium, etc. So he gave some general ideas. And it's said that when Srila Rupa Goswami met with this proposed architect of the temple, Rupa Goswami suddenly went into deep meditation. He went into samadhi, it's written. And he envisioned Goloka Vrindavan. And when he came out of that samadhi, he shared that vision with the architect and told him to construct the temple accordingly. This is what is written in the Vrindavan Research Institute. Hare Krishna. We're so fortunate now that we have access to that institute. They're very favorable and just giving us a green light to help in any way that we can. I think it's many lifetimes service. There's 32,000 scriptures. So Akbar gave 13 lakhs of rupees for the construction of the temple. At that time, that was around, now 13 lakhs is $18,000, but in those days, it was his entire budget for 1 year. Akbar, Moghul emperor, giving his entire budget for 1 year to build this temple. So thousands of workers were engaged, and work went on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there were not only workers, but how would I describe it? Whole troops, you could say, of camels and horses and elephants and bullock carts that all came from Akbar's royal court. Now, red sandstone was used for the construction. Those of you who have been here to Vrindavan, you'll notice it's very unique. A red sandstone was used for the construction. Now, of course, marble was available in abundance because, nearby Jaipur and other areas in Rajasthan, there's still so much marble. So marble was available. But they used red sandstone because in those days it was a sign of great opulence. Only the palaces of kings used red sandstone, and only royal families had permission to make their houses out of it. I read that it was the first time in the history of India when red sandstone was used to make a temple in this part of India, especially in Vrindavan. So it was all because, of course, the devotion of Rupa Goswami, and of course the flood of mercy that was taking place on the orders of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to go to Braj and revive that spiritual abode for the people of that time, for us now, and for the people in the future. We know this Sankirtan movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it's meant to flourish for 10,000 years. So this is some of the initial history. It just makes it so much more interesting for us. So I read that countless coconut ropes made of coconut coir, it's called C-O-I-R, like bark, were made to, in order to lift and to lower heavy stones in the making of the temple. Actually, there's a lotus flower that's in the center, up at the top dome, in the main entrance when you come in. A beautiful one-piece red sandstone lotus up there. And I think even today they're trying to figure out how they got it up there because it's so heavy, so massive, so beautiful. But according to what I was reading in the Institute, they would use coconut ropes made of C-O-I-R, kind of bark, to lift and lower all the heavy stones in the temple. And above that main compound, 7 stories were constructed with many, you could say, subfloors between those floors for different purposes. It wasn't just 7, but there were subfloors between the main floors. And in the midst of all this, on different levels, there were entire courtyards for the performances of yagyas, and they had dances and dramas and various, recitals, especially I was reading bhajans and kirtans to glorify Govindaji. It was massive. And engraved on all 4 corners of the temple were different kunjas or forest groves, it said, for sakis and sakas, for cowherd boys and cowherd girls to do their seva for Govindaji. And Ganesh deities were installed in all 4 entrances to the temple. And I also read at the beginning of every staircase, there was a deity of Ganesh. Now, the temple took 30 years to complete. 30 years. Can you imagine? But unfortunately, Srila Rupa Goswami didn't live long enough to see it to completion. But Srila Jiva Goswami, who lived to be 85, being the younger of the 6 Goswamis, he did see it to completion. And I was so surprised and so satisfied and happy to learn that he actually, upon coming for the, you could say the opening or the final ceremony for that temple, when he saw it completed like that, he actually spoke a very beautiful prayer, you could say an ashtakam, in glorification of the temple. I say spoke because he didn't actually write it down. He just saw finally, the temple was complete, and he just, from his heart, through his lotus mouth, came this beautiful ashtakam, glorifying the Govindaji temple. So he didn't write it down. However, at that particular time, there was a devotee, a scribe, who was with him, and he quickly wrote down what Jiva Goswami had said. And I would like to conclude today with those very prayers. I know it's a short class, but the next part is the atrocities of Aurangzeb and how he destroys that temple. So I don't want to mix the two. We'll just conclude with all these, remembering all these wonderful pastimes of, thousands of workers and the blessings of Rupa Goswami and the powerful Raj, Man Singh, and how they all cooperated together historically to glorify Govindaji. And then Jiva Goswami, he sees the temple, and then these are his prayers. I'm not including the Sanskrit because it's quite long, a little technical and detailed, but it's called Govinda Mandir Ashtakam. The Govinda Mandir Ashtakam by Srila Jiva Goswami. He spoke. Sri Krishna, manifesting a thirst to protect his own devotees, always appears situated on the Yogapith, the divine pastime place, here in Vrindadevi's forest, Vrindavan, which is praised by the group of gods beginning with Shiva. Vrindavan is thus the major cause of dissatisfaction, even in Vaikuntha's, Vishnu's own realm's, heart. In such a Vrindavan manifests what is to be known by means of the group of hundreds of scriptures, Shruti Smriti, through the principle of Shri Govinda, i.e., Govinda manifests the truth of all scriptures there, in Braj. The second of the Ashtakam. When Sriman Akbar, Sanskritized as Arkavara, meaning the best son, protected the world in his rule, the good people engaged their respective dharma and obtained happiness in the highest degree. The virtuous Vaishnavas always gave him, Akbar, blessings joyfully because they considered that very place, Vrindavan, to be the place of Shri Govinda and therefore worth residing in. Under Akbar, such residence was possible. Giving some credit to Akbar. Number 3. In this place, Vrindavan, his, Akbar's constant companion, the king named Sri Man Singh, was like a moon that caused the swelling of the milk ocean. That is the glory of Prithvi Raja's shining lineage. Man Singh was the son of Bhagavan Das, who in turn was born of the king Bharahamala, or Balamala. Making the temple by his own strength, may he, Man Singh, ever partake of joy with stable Lakshmi, prosperity, the goddess of fortune. Number 4. Similar to Sriman Akbar was another king named, again, Shriman Singh, who was such that when he marched into the enemy's direction, he would cause his victorious side to cast aside all doubts and enjoy a round. Who on this earth does not know of that very lion amongst men? Kings in his camp who fell on the ground and died in wars went to heaven and found themselves to be like a flag bearer of victory even in heaven. 5. The victorious king, Shriman Singh, is one born in the royal Kachava lineage. His best man, the intelligent Sri Kalyanadasa, who takes shelter at the lotus feet of Sri Govinda, must always be victorious. Joyfully creating that, or his Govinda's temple, speedily, he zealously brought the work to completion. 6. Sri Haridas, the foremost leader of those serving the lotus feet of Sri Govinda, grants love to those who serve Govinda. He is the one by means of whom, from the very beginning, this temple is increasing in the joy or the rasa of sweetness of service. He is the one by whom the king, Shriman Singha, duly obtained incredible bliss. May Sri Haridas always rejoice. Number 7. Amongst the architects residing in Delhi is the venerable one named Govindadas, sheltered by Sri Man Singh. He built this beautiful temple here. He is the cause of happiness and prosperity to the respectable Vaishnavas, now and in the future. And thus he himself must ever be made a receptacle of Hari's own compassion. Number 8. In this temple work here, there is the most eminent Bhagavan and the expert Ugrasena. May the two of them, dispatched by the king, Sriman Singh, rejoice. Which other one is to be singled out? Or who is better or who is less? Both of them gave help to the other, step by step, and may both gain the highest joy. Then he goes on a few more verses, but not part of the Ashtakam itself, but, quote, the temple's creation was, in the Vikram somewhat year named Muni 7, Veda 4, Ritu 6, and Chandra 1, i.e. VS 1647 or AD 1590. May Shri Govinda be pleased by these verses of praises for his temple. This soul Jiva, i.e. Jiva Goswami, must honor the two named Sri Rupa and Sanatan, the performers of service to the master of Sri Vrindavan that was discontinued because of the age of Kali. The end of Sri Govinda Mantir Ashtakam, 8 verses praising Govinda's temple, spoken by Sri Jiva Goswami in the year 1727, on the 12th day of the bright fortnight of Bhadra, Vaishnava Das, having written it down by the scribe in Kamyavan. Well, this, of course, is, it's not 1727, our calculation, but in their calculation, that the timings are different. So the end of Sri Govinda Mandir Ashtakam, 8 verses praising Govinda's temple, spoken by Srila Jiva Goswami. In this year, on the 12th day of the bright fortnight of Bhadra, Vaishnava Das, was the scribe, has written it down in Kamyavan. Hare Krishna. I wanted to mention that this Ashtakam was actually discovered by one of Vrindavan's important Goswamis, Srivats Goswamis, a well-known scholar here in Vrindavan. He went to Kamyavan some years ago. He was researching this matter of the construction of this beautiful temple of Govindaji. And while there, he found this particular document written by Vaishnava Das in one of the old libraries in Kamyavan. Hare Krishna. So, wow, such nectar. Shri Brajabhumi, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki, Shri Govinda Deva ki, Shri Rupa Goswami Prabhupada ki, Sanatana Goswami ki, Jiva Goswami ki, the Sad Goswamis of Vrindavan ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. So we will return in a couple of days, and we'll continue with the glories of Srila Rupa Goswami's service to Govinda Dev. As I mentioned, there's some difficult discussions about how the temple was partially destroyed, but how Govinda was rescued in time, and his wonderful journey, protected by the devotees in so many different ways, the service that he gave, from Vrindavan down to where he resides today in Rajasthan, in Jaipur, the city of victory, which was really constructed just for Shri Govindaji. There's a lot of nectar ahead. The history of all these wonderful devotees who serve the Lord in so many various ways. So thank you, Prabhus. I'll be back in a couple of days. Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shamasundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki, Shri Prabhupada ki, Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Maya Pradam ki, Shri Krishna Sankirtanya ki, Go Premanandi, Jai Jai Sri Sri Radhe.